We have Richard Leto. Richard is born and raised in the Italian-American enclave of South Philly. He currently lives in Columbus, Ohio with his wife Susan. Rich is the ambassador for the online publication We the Italians in Columbus. Welcome, Rich. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor really for me to be here. I feel like I'm in a shrine. I've used that word before. The experience that we each have from Lou, our scholar, Dr. Carla, the stuff that I'm going to show you can really be in any Italian cultural center. My story is about the journey of following my roots. My theme is the title of my book, which everybody in this room could also say that's the theme behind their story, so to speak. But it's so apropos that your theme is saving our stories before they are lost forever. That's what I have here. I have a box that my grandmother had that had valuable vintage photos, original documents, cursive Italian writing. She dies, the box goes to my parents. My parents fill that box with family memorabilia, heirlooms I call them, museum quality exhibits, artifacts, meaning if you were to touch them, they're pristine still after they've colored because of the newspaper and the acid in them. However, they're well preserved, 100 years old, some of those pieces are. They were basically a time capsule. My subtitle is a time capsule because that's what it was buried. Me and my sister knew it was always in the basement. We looked at it every now and then. What are we gonna do with this stuff? Well, what I've done is tell my story in a book. If you look at this photo, 1923, that's my family from Calabria. My grandfather standing stoic, Francesco, Leto. My grandmother sitting, Caterina, Tropiano. Does anybody notice anything unique about the photo? 7 children. My father is the gentleman, third from the left. Typical of any old Italian photo, what might you say? None of them are very good. Classic, a classic, there it is. But if you really look deep into that photo, they almost, each one of them have their hand on each other's. This is La Familia. Family is, fill in that blank. Everything. I heard, right? Everything. So my story is a cardboard box. I call it the family time capsule. It's handed down generations. There are heirlooms in it. I describe in this visual how I unearthed that box and sort of select the material that I'm going to be on display here. I'm often asked what inspired me to write my book. I can tell you it was because they did what we're doing. They saved that history for somebody, the next generation, my parents, and now I get to tell that story. I wish they were here to tell their story. There's the box. There's some of the stuff that I'm going to show you. That portrait of my grandmother stood in my mother's dresser in her bedroom for as long as I could remember, right? You'll see an original, I'll show you an original certificate of naturalization from 1915. It feels like it's on parchment paper if you were to touch it. Once again, it could be displayed probably in any exhibit across any Italian cultural center. A little excerpt from my introduction. I write, it will be obvious as you read the following pages that I repeatedly mention the names of my Italian immigrant grandparents. This is no mistake. My story cannot be told without them. So my book's broken down into 5 different chapters. On my paternal side, it's my Leto side, my surname. This is my Leto family's in that vintage photo. My chapter 2 is on my maternal side, also Italian immigrants of the Great Arrival, late 19th, early 20th century. The third chapter is the box itself and the materials within that box. The fourth is what we talked about, visiting your ancestral town, whether it was Lou visiting his town or that I visited my town. The only thing is, when I visited my town, I did it for 4 consecutive years. That first trip, I went back 3 times. I couldn't walk enough on those alleyways and touch those walls where my grandfather's house was. And I've been back 4 consecutive times for the San Donato Festival, which is the patron saint of the town. The mayor knows me, the priest knows me, distant cousins know me. My cousin has an olive oil factory there. So let's go through some of the documents. So chapter 1, once again, is my paternal side. Chapter 2 is my paternal side. And you can see where they came from. Calabria-Catanzaro, 1902, 1910 here. Maternal side, also 1910. But what's interesting, a couple pieces. On my paternal side, my grandparents were physically married in Calabria. So they came over as a married couple with 1 children, which was my Aunt Marie. On my maternal side, little weird, my grandfather Aniello comes in 1902 by himself, meets family in Philadelphia, and then my grandmother Elisa comes in 1910, 8 years later, and they're married in Philadelphia. Now, I don't know why or how, but they did that, right?
You probably sent for her.
Yeah, arranged marriages, you know, we know how that goes, yeah. But here's the other thing, and this is the piece that I like. Everybody thinks the port of entry was Ellis Island. No. Right here, some of them came through the port of Philadelphia. And not to steal away with Chicago, but when you look at the largest influx of Italian immigrants during the early Great Arrival, New York has us, I'll give New York, but Chicago and Philly are very, very tightly right there, right there. I might have to give Chicago second, third is Philadelphia. But they came through the port of Philadelphia, where there's still a historical marker that represents that immigration station. So I had to put this picture here, and you'll see why in the next slide. So I've been to Puglia, I've been to Foggia, which is northern Puglia, and the town of Biccari, Comune di Biccari. I'm hoping to get to Calabria later this year. About 300 kilometers apart, okay? They all leave from Naples, the port of Naples. But look at this picture, once again, 300 kilometers apart. Well, guess what happens when they come to Philadelphia? They're less than 4 blocks, city blocks apart. The lower red dot is where I was born and raised with my grandparents, and the other one is my other grandparents, 4 blocks apart. Does anybody know what that whole area might be called in Philadelphia? Little Italy, it's the enclave. So when we say Little Italy, what do we mean? This is where Rocky ran, where the Rocky movie, right? That's my hometown. Where the butcher shop was an Italian proprietor, the barber, the tailor, the funeral parlor, the shoemaker, the pastry shop, it goes on and on. This is that cluster right there. Thousands of them. But to know that in Italy they were 300 kilometers apart, and here they reside here. So the story goes, my mother lives at 1129, my father's at Kimball Street. They meet at an Italian grocery store, and that's where this marriage takes place. I know, you can't make that up. You can't make that up. So this is one piece that's in the box, besides the vintage photos. Every society had their club, right? Association, mutual aid society. I can't date the picture, but it's the Santa Caterina, the Ionio society. Now, if you notice the people with the vestments, and you can't see, it's probably right, they're usually the officers of that club. But there they are, hundreds of them, right from that town, all going to celebrate St. Catherine, that procession that they're going to have in the city.
Is this in Philadelphia?
It is, yes. So here's the procession of St. Catherine. On the back of the photo, you know, I looked at the back and there's some handwriting. So they tell me that my father's this little gentleman way up front. My grandfather's in the back, right? This is one of the local Italian national parishes, besides the other ones, which I'll explain. But this is a photo buried in that box, right? Once again, maybe you could put it on an exhibit someday upstairs. The original documents, here you go. So my grandfather becomes a naturalized citizen in 1926. I think Lou, you had the picture up, right? Which is interesting though. I know them not living in Kenilworth Street. This is back in 1926. He's 46 years old. Talk about waiting a long time, right? Thankfully, he did become an enemy alien when World War II comes around, right? So I look at this on a Google map, Kenilworth Street. I have my cousin, I said, go down here. It's not a tenement. Philadelphia didn't have tenements like New York, but it's like a garage with like a thing. I said, I can't believe they lived at this address with 7 children. 7 children are listed. One of them is my father. My father was born Luigi on his birth certificate, but he's Louis in America. My grandfather was Francesco, but look at his name in America, Frank. So this is my paternal side. There's my grandmother, my Holy Communion, another picture buried in the box. I kind of always, I mean, she's just holding my hand so tight, it's not even funny. So here's the other document of my other grandfather, but he becomes a citizen in 1915, World War I, right, going on. He's 31 years old. Also, the address I don't recognize as their permanent house when I grew up, but it's in Philadelphia. They have my grandmother listed as Elisa. I know her as Elisa. 2 children. Once again, this document's over 100 years old, 1915. Still in pristine condition. It could be on any exhibit, any exhibition somewhere. This is the most precious document, as far as I'm concerned. Talk about telling your story. This is what my grandfather did. He's documenting his history. This paper's real. I have it. I might not give this up so easily. It says in Italian, right? Look at the first line. He's writing a journal. Venuto in America, 1902. It's accurate. I've looked at the ship manifest. It's accurate. The next thing he wants to tell us is what year he received his citizenship. That is correct with the immigration paper I just showed you, 1915. Tells me when he got married, right? Tells me when he's born in 1884. He tells me when my grandmother's born. And then it lists all his children, except one, my mother. My mother's missing, because she was born in 1928. But one of the children passes away, Morta, Donato. Donato was the patron saint of that town. So the firstborn boy is named Donato. And then there's my uncle Nicolino, Luigi, Riccardo, Christina, and Maddalena. So my mother's the missing link, right? No. I find another piece of paper, similar, but guess who's listed at the bottom? That's my mother in 1928. So, is this paper another 100 years old, close to it? Sure. But once again, when you look at, we're telling our family story, but thanks to my grandparents, they gave me that information to tell you, right? Here's a piece of paper, sort of the obituary, right? From the El Progresso, the local Italian written newspaper at the time. My grandfather was a hat maker. He worked at the largest employer of Italian immigrants in the city of Philadelphia, John B. Stetson, very large employer. He started there, but then he opened up his own retail hat business. So that's some of the translation over there. He dies in 1930, so I don't know my grandfather Aniello. This is another bit of an obituary, but it's a little bit bigger because it lists his children: Donato, Nicola, Luigi, Riccardo, Christina, Maddalena, and my mother Elisa. So they had 8 children, but one died. So I know I was able to be fortunate to know all my aunts and uncles: Donato, Uncle Nicky, Uncle Luigi, Aunt Christina, Aunt Maddalena. And it's sort of telling you that the store is still going to be open after his passing. Here's another document that just blows my mind. Me and you might throw our receipts out. We don't keep receipts. Why did they keep this receipt from the funeral parlor in 1913? It cost $606, right? I know. Do that math, right? I mean, like I said, I've got this document from 1930. But you know what I find interesting about it? Look at the company that they used. Yeah. Like I said, besides the butcher shop, the tailor, the pastry shop, Italian proprietors also had funeral parlors, as we used to call them, or funeral home, right? Thankfully, it was paid in full. Can you see it down at the bottom, right? Here's another document, a mortuary document. Does anybody have an idea what this might be? So my grandfather was a member of, if you look at in the top corner, the Sons of Italy, right? Which was very, since 1905, that was around. He dies in 1930, they put out the mortuary document, and I circle in red there that 300. So what do you think happens because my grandfather dies? His wife, my grandmother, gets $300, sort of a life insurance. But he dies from an embolism, a pulmonary embolism. He's 45 years old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And over here is the lodge numbers. They're up to 4 digits now. Sons of Italy lodges have 4 digits. But they were all named after. There's probably Antonio Mucci Lodge, so on and so forth.
So this is like the obituary for the local lodge?
I call it the mortuary fund, meaning all those deceased people receive money or their spouse. Yeah, which is still, life insurance policy, if you want to call it that. So my grandfather, this is another vintage photo that could be hanging in any exhibit, any cultural center. What's interesting, that's my grandfather in the doorway in yellow. My mother and her siblings lived upstairs, like typical, right? What do you think's interesting about the signs in the window? They're all in, well, no, they're not in English. They're in Italian. Here's what I can tell you. So, Viva la Canta di Cavour. So guess what happens? I can date this picture. It's about 1919. Guess which ship is in the port of Philadelphia at that time? It's an Italian ship, the Canta di Cavour. Even though there's some famous. But he's welcoming who?
Marinai.
The Italian Navy, because they're in the port of Philadelphia. So I had to do a little digging. And then he says, Viva, long live the Italian Navy, Marina, right? People ask me all the time, Rich, do you have any of those hats? I wish I did. I wish I did.
So
right?
I have a question for you. In the front of the building at the bottom, those 2 doors, is that where they put the coal?
Could be. Could be, sure. Could be. Good question, yeah, could be. But I'll tell you what's weird. I mean, they owned actually 3 properties. Because I was born in there's like 1129. But I mean, it's just amazing. And really, if you really want to look, can you actually see that window? Can anybody see the flag that's hanging in that window? I can't quote.
It's an American flag.
It's an American flag. Can you imagine? Right, he's an American citizen. This is he becomes a citizen in 1915. Here it is, 1919, and he's got the American flag. That sign says something about cleaning hats on the top. So yeah, and then it's modern hat manufacturing. This is inside the store. This is an aunt and uncle. People ask me if I've had the boxes, Stetson. No, I don't have any hats. But the next slide, you'll see. Look at the cash register, right? There he is. Does anybody see what the sign says at the top there? Can you imagine walking into a store and what's it say? Positively no trust, meaning what? Hey, Mr. Lucera, I'd like to have a hat today and I pay you next week.
Oh.
No, I don't trust.
Really?
We don't trust. Yeah. And if you're looking close, the paper he's got is the El Progresso. So he's he's got the Italian newspaper of the day right there. Sort of inside the store too, again. Here's his business card. It was in the box. It's a business card. I'm glad that hats are made to fit your head, thankfully, right? So, this business card is 90 to 100 years old. This is a picture in the box of my mother when she makes her sacrament. I had to throw this picture because this is me and my sister in my grandmother's house in the Little Italy section. Yeah.
There's the ice box.
Yeah, right. And how about the radiator? Don't forget the radiator too, right? Classics. And actually, there's a coffee pot, the old coffee pot up at the top on the range there. This is in there, right? When you get born, I don't know if anybody used to give you bonds, right? But what's the interesting, guess where they purchased it? The local bank of Philadelphia. There was all these different Bank of Calabrese, so on and so forth. You get your tickets to go overseas, transfer money, to look at contracts or things you needed to sign. I still have this. I will not give that up. The thing is, it's expired. It topped out at $190. I punched in the serial number, but it's an heirloom.
Yeah.
It's something I cherish, right?
It's historic.
Thank you. Oh, look at this document from 1923 in the box. It's a loan document. Well, why did they keep it? There's their signatures. I mean, can you ask for any more from your family? There's my grandfather, the top line, the bottom line, and the stamps. My understanding, the stamps are supposed to cover because if somebody tried to rip that off and commit fraud. But anyway, from 1923, he borrows $10,000 from the Sons of Italy. I have no idea. What did you want that money for, grandparents? What was that money for? And then the deed to the house is in there from 1931, almost 100 years old. At that time, and at that time, my grandfather's passed, but it's only my grandmother in her name with the deed. So that's where I was born, 1129. These were in there. Everybody know what these are? Holy card, mass cards, right? So that's my grandmother here, and that's her sister that never married. Her name was Francesca, but in America, she was Frances. If you remember the little obituaries, they were only about that big, but the takeaway here is that's my parish. Does anybody know? I know Carla knows. St. Mary Magdalene de Pazzi, the first Italian national parish in all of the U.S. 1852, before Italy is unified. Just look that up.
Wow.
Yeah, it's, and guess who was baptized at that church? Here's the placard, me, right here. I was baptized. My parents were married here, my grandparents worshiped there. St. Mary Magdalene de Pazzi. It's only open on a Sunday Mass. Unbelievable.
It's still open?
It only for one Mass on a Sunday. And then my grandmother's in a plaque. There's a picture in the box she donated at the Jubilee in 1952, $100. Look at all those names, O's and O's, a lot of O's and A's. But there's my grandmother. There's the church, still standing today. It is. And my birth certificate was in there from Pennsylvania Hospital. And if you didn't know, Pennsylvania Hospital is the first hospital or the oldest in the U.S., founded by Ben Franklin and Dr. Thomas Bond. Yeah, there's my feet. So, Dominic, I told you, Richard Giuliani was a friend of mine. He was the expert on early Italian immigration in Philadelphia, wrote 3 books. He became a friend of mine. Before he passed, I sent him my draft document. I said, can you look at this and give me your opinion? He gave me his opinion, but I said, can you give me a testimonial? And here it is. And I tell you what's touching about this. He says that I was inside the community, meaning, Carla, I'm a primary source. You know, scholars like Dr. Carla want to say, you know, your secondary source. I always look at the bibliography and the references. I say, okay, yeah, Dillingham Commission, da-da-da-da-da-da. Here I am able to tell that story from a primary perspective based on that box full of materials. I appreciate your time. But I'll tell you what we should do here is not let that happen. If you've got children or grandchildren, don't let that happen. We did, right? We did.
Yeah.
Thank you.